How does a common household slave end up humiliating the most powerful Khan on earth and redrawing the map of China forever? The southeastern coast of China in the 17th century was a world where fortunes and fates were made and destroyed by whoever controlled the sea. The Zheng family ruled this world, a maritime empire of staggering wealth and military power, with a private navy that rivaled any monarch in Asia. In the courtyards of their grand compound lived a boy named Shi Lang, a household slave whose job was to be invisible and whose destiny was to be unforgettable. He was the kind of child whose eyes absorbed everything: the tides, the tactics, the arrogance of the men above him, storing it all for later. The Zheng Maritime Empire was one of history's most remarkable private military forces, a fleet that had defeated the Dutch, defied the Qing, and controlled Asia's most vital sea lanes. Zheng Chunggong, known in the West as Koxinga, was the empire's founding genius, a Ming loyalist who had turned personal conviction into maritime sovereignty. The slave boy found his way into the Zheng navy, and spent his nights teaching himself everything his masters never thought a slave needed to know. No matter how brilliantly he performed, the Zheng aristocracy reminded him regularly that a man born in chains would always carry their mark, a mistake they would pay for dearly. In the 17th century Chinese maritime society, household servants were property, not people, and no amount of ability could buy you out of the category you were born into. The words Shi Lang overheard through a paper screen: always a slave, never a commander, lodged in him like a splinter that would fester for decades into something lethal. The Taiwan Strait was the center of this world, the narrow passage between a continent's ambitions and an island's defiance, and the man who knew it best would rule it. The Qing Dynasty, the Manchu Empire that had swept down from the north to conquer China, had taken everything except the sea, where the Zhengs remained defiant and sovereign. When Zheng Qinggong executed members of Shi Lang's family in a fit of aristocratic rage, he destroyed the last reason Shi Lang had to remain loyal. In the dark of night, Shi Lang took a small boat and crossed to the Qing side, carrying no weapons, but carrying something worth more than any fleet: complete knowledge of every Zheng secret. He arrived at the Qing naval installation not as a refugee but as a gift, and the Qing commanders had enough military intelligence to understand exactly what they had received. Emperor Kangxi, one of the most capable rulers in Chinese history, heard about the defecting naval genius and summoned him immediately. Shi Lang unrolled his charts before the Qing commanders and began to speak, and the information that poured out of him rewrote everything they thought they knew about the Taiwan Strait. The Penghu Islands were the key. Whoever held them controlled the approach to Taiwan, and Shi Lang knew their waters as intimately as most men know their own homes. When the Qing gave Shi Lang command of their fleet, a former household slave became an admiral, a transformation so extraordinary that his own sailors refused to believe it at first. The fleet he commanded was staggering: hundreds of warships, fire basils, supply junks, the imperial resources of a dynasty placed in the hands of the man who was once someone's property. Shi Lang wore his flagship like a man who had been born on it, checking every cannon, every sail, every chain, because he knew what a single failure in combat would cost. On Taiwan, the Zhen kingdom of Tungning had built something genuine, a functioning Chinese state, a Ming loyalist dream made real, and it had no idea what was coming for it. Zheng Qishuang, the young ruler who had inherited his grandfather's empire without his grandfather's genius, presided over a court increasingly living on borrowed time. When Zheng scouts reported the approach of the largest Qing fleet ever assembled, the news hit Taiwan's capital like a stone thrown in still water. The Zheng War Council argued through the night: defend Penghu, or defend Taiwan directly, and made their decision without realizing that the man attacking them already knew what they would decide. Shi Lang's finger tracing, the Penghu charts, was the finger of a man returning to the most intimate knowledge of his career, the waters where he had learned to be a commander under the men he was about to destroy. The typhoon that hit the fleet en route to Penghu would have broken any commander's nerve, but Shi Lang had sailed these waters in worse conditions than this. When the storm passed and the fleet emerged, battered but intact, sailors saw their admiral standing at the prow reading the dawn ocean, and their confidence became absolute. The first sight of the Penghu Islands, the Zheng fortifications visible, their fleet arranged in careful defensive formation, was the moment Shi Lang's preparation met its purpose. He studied the Zheng defensive line through his telescope and saw every mistake they had made, because he had helped write the tactical manuals they were following. The battle orders Shi Lang gave were surgical, each maneuver designed to exploit a specific weakness that only he knew existed. The knowledge of a former insider converted into devastating offensive advantage. When the Qing fleet split into its attack formations, the Zheng defenders saw something they had never faced: an enemy who moved through their tactical language like a native speaker. The Battle of Penghu began with the crack of cannon fire, that could be heard on the Taiwan shore, the sound of a dynasty's final chapter being written in smoke and ire. Shi Lang's coordinated broadsides tore through Zheng ships with precision that bordered on the personal. This was not just warfare, it was a reckoning. Every Zheng tactic, the fire ships, the flanking formations, the defensive chain had been taught to Shi Lang's own captains before the fleet even left harbor. Qing Marines swarmed onto Zheng decks in a storm of steel and screaming. The close-quarters brutality that decided the battles that cannons couldn't finish. The Zheng line broke, not gradually but all at once, the discipline collapsing as ship after ship caught fire or stopped responding. The moment when numbers became rapid. Shi Lang directed the final encirclement from his command deck with the calm of a man completing a project he has been working on since childhood. When the last Zheng flagship burned, its dragon banner catching fire and falling into the sea, the maritime supremacy of the Zheng family ended as dramatically as it had begun. Shi Lang ordered the survivors rescued from the water, a gesture of mercy that also served a political purpose. Conquered people treat you better when you don't massacre them. The Qing dragon flag rising over Penghu was visible from Taiwan, and the people who saw it understood exactly what it meant for everything they had built there. In Taiwan's capital, the news arrived like a wave hitting stone. The defensive fleet destroyed, the buffer gone, the Qing navy, now a half-day's sail from their harbor. Shi Lang's decision to negotiate, rather than immediately invade, was his most politically brilliant move, giving the Zheng leadership a way to surrender without dying. The debate inside the Zheng court was the saddest kind. Brave men arguing for a cause that had already lost, choosing between honor and survival. Zheng Keshuan chose to surrender, and in doing so, spared Taiwan the kind of conquest that leaves civilizations in ash, a decision history has been ambivalent about ever since. The formal transfer of sovereignty happened quietly at a harbor dawn. Documents and seals exchanged, 2 centuries of resistance, formally concluded in the time it takes to stamp a document. When Shi Lang stepped ashore on Taiwan, he became the first representative of a unified Chinese state to stand on that island soil, and he understood exactly what that meant. He surveyed what the Zhengs had built, the towns, the farms, the functional society, with the eyes of a man calculating how to preserve rather than destroy. The debate over whether to keep Taiwan or abandon it was the moment Shi Lang's campaign could have become meaningless, and he refused to let it. The memorial he wrote to Emperor Kangxi, arguing for Taiwan's incorporation, was one of the most consequential documents in Chinese history, and most people have never heard of it. Kangxi read it, reread it, and changed his mind. This led not only winning a battle, but winning the most important political argument of the era. Taiwan became a prefecture of Fujian province. Officially, irrevocably, a part of China, a status that would define the island's identity for the next 2 centuries. A cartographer's hand adding Taiwan to the official Qing map of China was the quiet, ink and paper conclusion of everything Shi Lang had fought to achieve. The emperor who raised Shi Lang to the nobility did something extraordinary. He officially erased the record of his servitude, granting him the legal fiction of having been a free man all along. The boy who carried trays and the admiral who commanded fleets were the same person. And that fact is the most astonishing thing about this entire story. The Qing garrison on the Penghu Islands was the physical manifestation of Shi Lang's strategic vision, permanent, fortified, and impossible to dislodge without a fleet he had already destroyed. In retirement, Shi Lang spent his evenings watching the same Taiwan Strait he had sailed for decades. The sea that had been his prison, his escape route, his battlefield, and his legacy. The Zheng family survivors, now living quietly on the mainland, had to watch their former servant being honored as the man who accomplished what they could not prevent. Later scholars who wrote about Shi Lang wrestled with the same question every generation has wrestled with. Is a man a traitor for betraying those who treated him as less than human? The Qing-era maps that show Taiwan as a Chinese prefecture are Shi Lang's most lasting monument, more permanent than bronze, more certain than memory. The historical irony runs deep. It was the Zheng family who first brought Taiwan under Chinese sovereignty by defeating the Dutch, and it was their own former slave who made that sovereignty permanent. Taiwan before Shi Lang had been Dutch, then Zheng, a contested island in a contested sea, and he resolved that contest in a way that echoes to the present day. His tactical innovation of chaining ships in strategic formations was adapted from both Chinese tradition and observed European naval practice, the mind of a man who learned from every source available to him. 2 previous campaigns against Penghu had failed in the typhoon season. Shi Lang waited and chose his weather window with the patience of a man who understood that timing is everything. The Qing officers who had questioned his appointment watched his victory with the particular silence of people who were wrong about something important and know it. European colonial powers watching from their trade routes saw China asserting maritime sovereignty with professional military force, and updated their strategic calculations accordingly. The sea was Shi Lang's true homeland, not Fujian where he was born, not the Zheng compound where he was enslaved, but the salt water that had no master and obeyed no hierarchy. A Fujian fishing village produced one of China's greatest admirals, proof that the empire's talent was scattered everywhere, suppressed by a system that saw status rather than ability. The social shame of servitude was designed to break the spirit, but in Shi Lang it created something else entirely. A cold, patient, comprehensive motivation to rise above the system that had diminished him. He trained Qing sailors with the intensity of a man who knew that their competence was the only insurance policy he had. A fleet that fought badly would cost him everything he had built. When Zheng Qinggong killed Shi Lang's family, he performed an act of such casual aristocratic cruelty that he apparently never considered the consequences. The final mistake of a man who underestimated his slave. Zheng Qinggong's legacy. The brilliant, driven founder was ultimately undone, not by the Qing army, but by his own family's treatment of a man they should never have crossed. Shi Lang's most lethal weapon was not his cannon or his fleet. It was the complete intelligence picture he carried in his head of every Zheng strategic position, ship count, and tactical preference. The night before the battle, Shi Lang stood alone at the prow, seeing both the island fortress he was about to attack and the ghost of the young slave who had served on similar ships a lifetime ago. The young Qing sailors who watched their admiral work understood something that no military manual could teach them. A man who has survived the worst that life can do to him is afraid of nothing. The destruction of the Zheng fleet at Penghu was not just a military victory, it was the permanent end of the most powerful private navy in Asian history. Shi Lang's signal flag snapping in the sea wind with the syntax of a military language. He had invented extensions to communicating complex tactical orders to dozens of captains simultaneously. When a Zheng commander recognized Shi Lang's flagship, the horror he felt was specific and personal. This wasn't just an enemy, it was someone who knew everything about you. Taiwan at sunset was beautiful in the way that places carrying enormous historical weight are always beautiful. The landscape indifferent to human drama, eternal where humans are temporary. The formal submission of the last Zheng official, kneeling before the man his family had owned, was the kind of historical reversal that makes you wonder if the universe has a sense of irony. Taiwan's existing population accepted the Qing administration with the pragmatic ambivalence of people who had survived one change of sovereignty already and understood how to survive another. Shi Lang's orders protecting Taiwan's temples were not just mercy. They were the product of a man who understood that what people worship is more central to their identity than who they're governed by. Emperor Kengshi's celebration of the Taiwan victory was the celebration of an empire that had finally achieved its southern maritime boundary, a completion that had been delayed for decades. The emperor who had called Taiwan a ball of mud not worth fighting for had been persuaded by a former slave that it was worth everything. The ultimate proof that ability outweighs origin. Taiwan's position in the sea lanes made it strategically essential. Shi Lang understood this when most of the court was looking at the island's size rather than its location. The memorial Shi Lang wrote proved his genius extended beyond tactics to strategy, beyond strategy to statecraft. The complete military-political mind that rare historical figures possess. The Qing garrison being established on Penghu was the permanent physical signature of Shi Lang's vision, defensive depth that protected Taiwan's incorporation for generations. The parallel of Shi Lang carrying messages for Zheng officers versus those officers' sons bringing messages to Admiral Shi Lang is the kind of reversal that history occasionally permits for those extraordinary enough to force it. The Taiwan Strait under Qing Maritime Patrol was the Admiral's legacy in its most daily operational form, the strategic peace he created requiring maintenance long after his death. The memorial temple where sailors prayed to Shi Lang's spirit suggests that his legend grew beyond the historical into something approaching the divine, which is what exceptional people sometimes become in the cultures they transform. The last Ming flag coming down on Taiwan was the end of something genuinely noble, a loyalty to a fallen dynasty, maintained against impossible odds, and Shi Lang was the instrument of its ending. The historical debate about Shi Lang, hero or traitor, will never be resolved because it depends entirely on which dynasty you're loyal to and which people you identify with. The graves on Penghu's rocky shores hold men from both sides of the battle, the human cost of a conflict that history records in dynasties but that individuals paid in lives. Shi Lang's logistical genius, keeping a fleet of hundreds fed, armed, and disciplined across open ocean, was as impressive as his tactical skill and far less celebrated. His knowledge of typhoon windows and monsoon patterns gave him the ability to move when his enemies expected him to be sheltering the weather as a weapon no enemy could counter. The imperial document making Taiwan a Chinese prefecture is a bureaucratic artifact, dry epistle, unexciting, and it represents one of the most consequential decisions in East Asian history. Taiwan's mountains and forests had watched Malayan traders, Dutch merchants, Ming refugees, and Qing soldiers arrive in succession of the island as a witness to the full drama of Asian maritime history. The indigenous Formosan peoples, who had lived on Taiwan for millennia, watched yet another wave of newcomers claim authority over their island. The conquest that Shi Lang accomplished was also their continuing dispossession. An old man watching the Taiwan Strait from a Fujian shore, spending his final years doing what he had always done, studying the water, reading the wind, still the admiral, still the slave's son, still the most interesting person in any room he entered. Taiwan's incorporation completed the Qing Empire's territorial consolidation. The dynasty finally secure from the maritime challenges that had threatened it for decades. Shi Lang's son joining the Qing Navy meant that the dynasty's most capable naval family had its origins in a household slave's determination to give his children something better than what he had been given. The Zheng family's greatest era was not military or strategic. It was believing that a man's value was determined by his birth rather than his capabilities. A mistake that destroyed them. European trading companies, revising their charts to show Taiwan as Chinese territory, were acknowledging that Shi Lang had permanently shifted the balance of maritime power in East Asia. Shi Lang's code of conduct for the Taiwan occupation specific, humane, practically designed, shows the thinking of a man who had learned from the inside how occupation feels to the occupied. In Taiwan's Ming loyalist tradition, he remains a villain. In the Qing imperial records, he is a hero. In the historical record, he is simply extraordinary, a man too complex for the simplicity of either label. The naval parade in Fujian harbor after the Taiwan victory was the visual proof that the empire's greatest maritime achievement had been accomplished by its most unlikely commander. The economic integration of Taiwan into the Qing Empire brought prosperity to both shore and island and the trade routes. Lang secured generated wealth for generations who never knew his name. Walking through a Taipei market, Shi Lang saw what his victory had preserved, not just territory but a living Chinese culture that might otherwise have been destroyed in the conquest. The final closing of the Ming Dynasty's chapter, not in Beijing where it fell, but on a small island in the Taiwan Strait, where its last loyal subjects finally surrendered, is the kind of historical footnote that deserves a full story. Kangxi's personal letters to Shi Lang treated him as an equal, the emperor and the admiral, the born ruler and the born slave, corresponding as two men who respected each other's exceptional minds. The Taiwan Strait in the evening light was peaceful, and that peace was Shi Lang's most practical legacy, the quiet dividend of extraordinary violence applied with extraordinary intelligence. Young Qing naval officers studying the Battle of Penghu were studying the work of a man who had been born with fewer advantages than any of them, and who had outperformed every generation before and after him. The folk stories that grew up around Shi Lang and Fujian turned him into something between a hero and a sea god. The popular imagination recognizing in him something that official history was too formal to fully express. The physical descriptions, preserved in historical records, his commanding height, the battle scar that marked his face, make him vivid across 3.5 centuries, a real person, not just a name. The moment Shi Lang became truly free was not the moment he was given an admiral's seal. It was the moment the Zheng fleet burned at Penghu, and the chains of his past dissolved in the same fire. Shi Lang died peacefully in 1696, surrounded by the family he had elevated from slavery to nobility, with the sound of the Taiwan Strait audible from his estate, a good death for a man who had survived so many bad possibilities. His funeral was attended by officers who had sailed under him, officials he had outmaneuvered, and common sailors who understood that this man had been one of them before he became something greater. In the 2 centuries of Qing rule that followed, Taiwan grew into a deeply integrated part of Chinese civilization, its population growing, its culture flourishing, all on the foundation Shi Lang had built. Modern historians debate in Shi Lang's legacy are still using the same terms his own contemporaries used: hero, traitor, genius, opportunist, because some historical figures are genuinely too complex for the language of simple judgment. The South China Sea and Taiwan Strait remain among the most strategically contested waters on Earth. The same waters that Shi Lang mastered, still carrying the weight of the same claims he helped establish. The Penghu Islands today look much as they did in 1683, rocky, windswept, beautiful, the landscape unchanged by the history that happened here. The rocks, not knowing or caring what they witnessed. Shi Lang was a slave, a traitor, an admiral, an earl, a father, a strategist, and a man who refused to accept the definition of himself that was given to him at birth. All of those things simultaneously, and none of them completely. The Zheng family built their empire on the assumption that the people below them could be kept below them, and Shi Lang spent his entire life proving that assumption catastrophically wrong. The fleet silhouetted against that burning sky at Penghu is one of history's great images, not because it's beautiful, but because of what it represents, impossible achievement, earned the hardest possible way. Taiwan's position, as a bridge between continental East Asia and the Pacific, gave it a geopolitical importance that emperors recognized in theory, but that Shi Lang secured in practice. The Qing, as successors to Mongol imperial ambition, meant that when Shi Lang served the Qing, he was in some sense serving the inheritors of the great Khan's vision, the ultimate irony of a slave, serving the world's greatest dynasty. The moment when Shi Lang gave orders to nobles was the moment that Chinese history demonstrated. Once again, that talent is the only aristocracy that actually matters in a crisis. The ocean at night has no memory of what happened on its surface, but the borders it helped establish, the maps it helped redraw, persist in the documents and disputes that Shi Lang set in motion. The eyes of Shi Lang, as imagined through the historical record, are the eyes of a man who never stopped watching, never stopped learning, and never forgave the people who thought he would. 2 centuries of Qing governance built institutions on the island that shaped its culture, all of it resting on the foundation that Shi Lang had argued for, and won, in a memorial that changed a dynasty's mind. Seen from above, the Battle of Penghu's tactical geometry shows Shi Lang's genius in its purest form, a mind that saw the entire battlefield simultaneously and used every piece of it. The Chinese historian writing Shi Lang's biography knew he was recording something that would challenge every assumption his society held about birth, merit, and destiny, and wrote it carefully. Container ships moving through the Taiwan Strait today are following sea lanes that Shi Lang secured in 1683, the infrastructure of modern commerce built on foundations he laid in war. Every time someone looks at a map of China that includes Taiwan, they are looking at a consequence of what a former household slave achieved in a naval battle 3.5 centuries ago. Shi Lang's spirit over the Taiwan Strait is not a metaphor. It is the ongoing relevance of his decision, his battle, his memorial, his vision, still shaping the world that looks at that stretch of water. The Qing Empire, at its height, was one of history's largest polities, and in its southeastern corner, secured by a former slave, was the island that would become one of the most disputed territories on Earth. The slave collar and the admiral's seal side by side tell the whole story without a single word. The distance between them was 30 years of suppressed genius, patient observation, and the cold calculation of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The last sight of Taiwan from the sea mountains emerging from morning mist. Harbor opening is the same sight Shi Lang saw as a conqueror, and the same sight millions of people have seen since, as travelers, traders, and inheritors of his decision. So here's the question that Shi Lang's story leaves us with. If the most powerful empire in Asia could be changed forever by a man born as property, what does that say about the systems that tried to tell him who he was? And what does it say about you?